for me, the best way to manage is to lead by example, show up, roll up your sleeves, show them how it's done, lead by example, and model the behavior you want to see. But sometimes you just need to be there at the background to make sure they feel safe, and then let them do it. And sooner or later, they will learn by themselves. So now with hybrid and remote teams, it is not easy for managers to engage employees. It is not easy for managers to hire, and to attract and retain talent. It is a global challenge.
Welcome to the Polymath podcast, highlighting your multidisciplinary life, showcasing that it's okay to do many different things. Hello, I'm Dustin, PolyInnovator. Today I'm talking with Evan Tzivanakis. He is a Talent Development Facilitator, Adjunct Professor, Executive Coach, and he's managed employees across 8 different countries. Welcome to the Polymath podcast.
Nice to see you, Dustin. How are you?
I'm doing great. This is the first interview I've done in a hot minute because I went to a podcasting conference, actually. And so, ironically, I did less podcasting during that time.
Yeah. Where was that?
It was in Washington, D.C., so the capital of the U.S.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'm sure you had fun, right?
It's interesting.
Learn a lot?
Meeting a lot of other podcasters. Yes.
Yeah.
So, for the audience's sake, where are you based and what do you do?
So, I'm based in Hamburg, Germany, where the weather today is lovely, around 25 Celsius. For September, it's quite nice, considering we're kind of north of Europe. And I am a coach. I work with managers. I help them solve specific challenges. I really enjoy to work with all kinds of managers, but I enjoy the most newly promoted managers, young talent, first-time managers. I work on them on one-on-one basis, on executive coaching. I am also a talent development facilitator. I work across different companies and different projects. And when it comes to facilitation, talent development, soft skills, leadership development. I'm giving you some of the topics here, right? Emotional intelligence, empathy, and so on and so forth. And I also teach. I am an adjunct professor at the EU Business School in Geneva, Switzerland, where I teach management and or leadership at MBA graduates.
And I think it's interesting too. I don't normally ask the guests to describe themselves, but I figure since you do so many different things, which is the point of this show, shout out to Panita for introducing us. She had said you're quite multidisciplinary, and what you just said there kind of just shows it too, even more so.
Yeah, it's, when you develop, I think, if you were to ask me my career, when I was 25, it was all about me, money, career, money, work, career. But what I end up realizing, and I know it happened to me, might not happen to all, right? When, after kind of 35, because I'm 40, after 35, I realized, 38, I got pleasure from teaching others, teaching them the mistakes I did, sharing my knowledge. Like I lived and worked in 8 different cultures, and one of my niches is I help managers manage and lead teams across different regions and cultures. So it motivates me when I share my experiences, my successes, my failures with new managers, and hopefully I help them become better managers, become better leaders, and at the same time become better people. Because, work occupies so much of our time. It occupies minimum 1/3 of our day. So I believe in better management. I believe in better leadership. And I believe if you have the ability to manage, to communicate, to lead better, yourself, you live a better life and a better day and a better week, and you go home with less headaches.
Yeah. I definitely agree, because I think that a lot of people lack that self-development. And when you develop yourself, when you push yourself to become something better than what you initially thought you could be, then you end up being better for other people as well. You can actually provide more to them.
Yeah, you mentioned something about self-development. No one is going to come and tell you, do you want to learn? I believe it's something. I believe that life is a lifelong journey in general. That's my kind of the mindset. And I think Socrates, to become a bit philosophical, was it Socrates that said, the more I know, the more I learn I don't know. The more I know, the more I realize I don't know. It's I think this comes maybe from my curiosity and the belief I have that knowledge is a powerful tool for transformation. And as I said, growing up in various cultures and environments, I suppose sparked an interest in me in understanding different cultures, different perspectives, which naturally, I suppose, led me to the roles where I could both learn from others, and share my own insights.
I agree. I definitely think getting exposed to other cultures really opens you up quite a bit. Getting to the first question here, what was your mindset 5 years ago and how have you changed since?
Wow. Let me rewind a little bit, right?
Yeah. That's pre-COVID at this point.
It is indeed, yeah. My mindset, I suppose, 5 years ago was focused on honing my experience in leadership and leadership development. And I am driven by the desire to make an impact on the organizations and the managers I work with. I help them understand the challenges of leading in VUCA times, which is actually the title of my book, Volatile, Uncertain, Complex, and Ambiguous. And since then, and especially after COVID, right, as we discussed offline with the pandemic and the lockdowns, my perspective, I suppose, has opened up significantly. I became more reflective, recognizing the importance of adaptability and emotional intelligence, the ability to put your feet in other people's shoes and understand how they think and why they behave the way they behave. And my focus has shifted a little bit from just driving results to also nurturing resilience and empathy in leadership.
I think some of the things you talked about there, we could kind of spin off to like the idea of generalists and being able to adapt. Or one topic that's actually come up a few times on this show is wicked problems and how people who are multidisciplinary polymathic can tackle those a little bit more effectively than just straight up specialists. So I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on either of those topics there.
Yeah, you see, it depends on the individual, I think. You know, I have some friends that they do the same work, the same industry, not the same work. Maybe they went up the ladder, but they're in the same industry and in the same kind of company for 10, 15 years. And that's fine. But I think it comes down to be self-aware. What do you really want to do? What motivates you? What drives you? And it's difficult sometimes to explore our own self, you know. So for me, I realized that teaching and coaching, for me, they are ways that I give back to empower others to navigate their own paths more effectively, right? So I suppose it's a cycle of continuous learning and sharing that has shaped my career and personal growth.
And self-learning is a big part of this. People who come on the show or watch the show, that's almost the integral pillar of being polymathic, I guess you could say. So
you see, I have a goal. Started this goal in September this month, 3 days ago. I want by next September to have read 12 books this year. So 1 book per month. A little bit old-fashioned. I'm sure you read, maybe you worked with SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And I think this is a SMART goal. It's specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's realistic, and it has a time, you know. I mean, if you really put your mind to it, everybody can read 12 books in a year. It's half an hour a day. So if I can achieve my target, I think I'm going to learn a lot, because I think if anybody that can read 12 books, you will naturally learn a lot of things, I think, right? From the books that you read. So hopefully I will achieve this goal. Hopefully, I hope.
I think you will. And I might steal that goal as well, because in the last couple of years, I find myself not reading nearly as much as I had once done. In 2018 and 2020 in particular, those 2 years, I read a ton of books, probably more than 12 in a year, but I was also spending a decent amount of time just doing that instead of doing actual like work. So there was a balance there.
You know, it's interesting you say that. And one of the things, in one of the courses I teach with first-time managers is, you know, it's about distractions. We live in the era of distractions, social media distractions. There are so many apps, there are so many notifications. Actually, I've turned off all my notifications on my phone, and the only notification I have is my family WhatsApp group. Right? Everything else can wait. But it's not easy not to be distracted in the era of social media and internet. It is very, very difficult. This is why I need to be, if you want to achieve a target, self-disciplined, because what can happen when you start reading a book after a page, let me check my Facebook, let me check my WhatsApp, let me check the Instagram, and then, so I think self-discipline is important here.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like I personally have been lacking in that regard a little bit in the last couple of years. So
Yeah.
I'll work on it. From coach, entrepreneur, adjunct professor, and you spent a lot of time learning and teaching. Where do you suppose that came into your life? Because we've talked about being an autodidact already in the 10 minutes that we've been talking. I'm kind of curious, like, how do you think that fell into your mindset in your life throughout your however many years?
I don't know. That's the answer. And what I mean, it developed naturally, I suppose. We talked about culture, the best way to understand the
You said
culture
curiosity too.
It is curiosity. That's number one. And, culture, the more you travel and the more you deal with people from other countries, I realize that the less differences people have. The fundamentals are the same in humans, I believe, right? So I believe that the best way to learn your own culture is to study others. Because if you don't live in another country, if you don't live in another culture, if you don't study that culture, you will not be able to understand your own. Why? Because you have nothing to compare with. So I think it came from curiosity and understanding different cultures. And even now, when I teach people from different cultures, when I work with, let's say, Europeans or Americans or Canadians or Australians, I take a different approach to coaching and teaching when I teach people from APAC, for example, because they have a different perception, they have a different attitude, they see you differently, they see you a little bit as a father figure when you teach, especially online, and they naturally remain a little bit silent. So throughout my coaching and training, one of the things I learned to do when I facilitate online is to create more breakout rooms, more interactions in order to bring them back into the topic, okay? And so, as I said, teaching and coaching for me are ways to give back because I really believe in better management. I really believe in better leadership. How many times I've seen it over and over again. People go back home from work and they bring with them work frustrations. They bring it out to their wife, they bring it out to their partner, they bring it out to their kids. So I believe if you know how to communicate better at work, if you adapt your leadership style, if you know how to do a proper feedback to an employee, to give proper feedback, if you know how to resolve conflict without creating friction and eliminate conflict, you will become a better person yourself, you will develop your skills, and you will live a better life yourself.
It's definitely a more holistic approach from what you're saying.
You see, it's work. Yeah, work takes a lot of our time. It's 1/3 of our lives. So, and sometimes work becomes our identity, right? So now with hybrid and remote teams, it is not easy for managers to engage employees. It is not easy for managers to hire, and to attract and retain talent. It is a global challenge. I see it in every country. There is a huge problem right now across different companies and different industries in attracting and retaining talent. On Saturday, was it Saturday or Sunday? One of those days, we went with my family for some food and a drink in a boat, one of those boat cafes that they're by the river, by the lake. Quite nice. It was busy, not crazy busy. But then I only saw one guy in his 60s working as a waiter, taking orders, cleaning tables, bringing you the bill. And he looked quite experienced. So when I paid, I've asked him, I said, are you the manager or the owner? And he said, no, I'm the manager. He said, why do you ask? I said, do you have a problem finding staff? And he said, yes, we can't. People don't want to work, or they come in with unrealistic expectations. You know, I don't know if you know McDonald's, you're from the US, but McDonald's, a couple of years ago, in some states in the US, were paying candidates $70 to turn up for interviews.
It's crazy.
You see? Especially the younger generation, millennials. I mean, I fall under the category, and I think you do. And I don't like to put people into boxes, but the world of work is changing, right?
I would even say Gen Z as well, because...
Yes, you are right. I mean, it's not the 9 to 5 anymore, and that was created in the Industrial Revolution by Ford, right? Where you go to work, you work 8 hours, you have your insurance. Back in the days, you would be happy and glad to only work 8-9 hours and not 12. But now the world is changing. I don't know where will this lead us, but right now it is very challenging for companies to retain, to attract, and retain talent.
It's funny that you bring up the Industrial Revolution, because that comes up in conversation on the show a little bit, because the whole idea of the narrow down specialization, be a cog in the wheel, has only really been around for the last 100 years since Henry Ford really pushed for that in his factories. And throughout human history, we've had generalists, and this is something I try to exclaim on this show as much as possible. It's like generalists have been a part of the human nature for a long time. We need both. But what's kind of your thoughts on that when it comes to the past 100 years, the specialization versus generalization?
Yeah. My thoughts are based on the work I do, and I will give you some facts, from the work I do with companies. A few years ago, let's say not long ago, 5 years ago, you could have a marketing department for a small, medium enterprise, and that marketing department, the marketing department only, maybe it would be 7 people. A dedicated graphic designer, a dedicated SEO, a dedicated email outreach person. This doesn't happen anymore. The 7 people are now 3 or 4. And companies are trying to hire people, yes, that fit the culture, but that they know how to do multiple things. Simply because they can't afford just to have a dedicated SEO person. Right. They want you to have 60% SEO skills, 30% Google Ads, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah. I've heard this a lot with the T-shaped marketer, for example, like you're saying.
Right.
I kind of one specialty, then a wide base, sometimes kind of referred to as the unicorn employee. And one thing I'm noticing, and I'm not the only one, is this disconnect between what you just said there, what the companies want and what the recruiting pages are saying. They'll say digital marketing specialist, and it'll be basically what you just said there, where it's a whole bunch of different skills. And so it's not a specialist, it's a generalist, So there's a disconnect on how they actually advertise to get these employees.
Hey, recruitment companies are sales companies. They want to make money and they want to attract. So, yeah.
So you've talked a lot about coaching and teaching. What's some of your best experiences you've had as a lecturer? Even a coach, I guess, too.
You mean as a lecturer at university, or both at university as students and professionals at the external work?
I think the professor aspect is what I was kind of thinking about.
Yeah. It's very interesting because the graduates I teach are not the typical student that they went to uni straight after high school or college. They have a little bit of experience in the real world. Maybe some of them might have 1 year experience, because they're MBA graduates, right? Some of them might have, 10 years of experience. Some of them could be very senior and they decide to do an MBA, which is fantastic. So I believe in the 70-20-10 learning methodology, which means 10%, if you want to learn something, 10% you will learn it from reading it or seeing it. 20% you will learn it from seeing others doing it, and 70% you will learn from when you do it yourself. Right? This is how grown-ups learn. Kids learn differently. We have pedagogy, which is how kids learn, and we have andragogy, which is how grown-ups learn. We learn different from kids. So the best way for a grown-up to learn something is to understand the theory and then actually go and do it. So what I try to do in my create a lot of real case studies. So after I teach the theory, create case studies where my students go and practice and come back with their findings and results and input and all that. So I try to simulate an environment that is realistic to the outside world, to the challenges that they will face when they graduate.
So you're saying self-learning, group learning, and learning from watching, right? Like learning from peers.
Yes, first you need to understand the theory, in theory, how something works, and then go and practice it and learn and fail and do it again and do it again and remind yourself of the theory and all that and all that. Because, you know, if you put a grown-up down and you keep reading and reading and reading and PowerPoint presentations and slides, you will lose them. So I think case studies and real-world simulation is the best way for grown-ups to learn.
I really like this idea. And for context, Evan, I started PolyInnovator, my personal brand, around this idea of modular education, changing based on what you need or desire to learn. And when the way you were describing what you just said there, it made me think of a concept I talked about called skill tree-based learning, which I came up with from video games. So let's say you have a MOOC from edX or whatever. It's a one, then one, then one, then one, like one video, maybe a test and a video. It's like one right after the other. And that's why a lot of people drop off, because they might get bored, they might get stuck, they might hit a plateau. And the skill tree-based learning kind of expands that out. So let's say you're trying to build a house, you have the carpentry, you have the plumbing, and then you have the electrical wiring, and then you might have a holistic course too. It's like blueprints, how to build it. And theoretically, yes, you need the blueprints first, but maybe you can just have a little intro module. But the point is, you don't need any of these three before the other. Technically, you need to have the frame of the wood, but you can learn about the plumbing first too, if you wanted to. And so the point being is that the students can choose which pathway they go down to. And basically, if they get stuck on it, they can either push past that plateau or switch to a different tree branch and learn at a faster pace. But what was really fascinating is that, like, when you were just talking about application versus learning from the teacher versus like actually just learning from peers too, the idea of like that could also apply to the skill tree. So basically switching, obviously as a professor, you have to kind of control when people switch a little bit. But I almost wonder too, from the student's perspective, if they choose, do they want to go down this tree or this tree? Do they need to learn from you, or do they need to learn from practice, or do they need to learn from something else?
Yeah. Well, a bit of everything. Like in some of the assignments, usually the big assignments, you know, throughout the course, we have assignments. We have smaller tasks and midterm and final assignments. The midterm and final assignments, I let them choose the subject based on what we covered.
Yeah.
So they will choose the subject, and they need to provide with an analysis or a case study or something. Because I believe if you empower people to do that, as long as they are within the content, they will learn more. You know, and you know, usually throughout an MBA, there are so many different points that you're going to learn, but you cannot learn everything. You know, out of the 10 main learning takeaways, let's say, I would be happy if you learn 3. But learn, I mean, really learn them, practice them, and go out and apply them. Because not everything will be relevant to everyone.
I definitely align with that. More context, I guess I should say, is I'm a swim coach, and I've taught for over a decade. And when I teach my clients, I either go with the why, the how, the what, and the why being the philosophy, the how being the physics, and the what being the psychology. And it's really interesting to think about. Every student generally anchors to one of those 3, and it's my job to figure that out and then train them through that lens and then teach them the rest of it too when they need it. But my point being is that some students really only need the basics. They might only need to learn the front crawl stroke and call it, and just, and that's okay. Like if they don't need to learn the other strokes, sometimes they just need to learn how to save themselves. And that's 30% of what they might need to learn, but it's still important. That's what that's what matters most. And not the panic.
If I can share a story with you.
Of course.
And then I learned that actually through the process. And the story is this: it happened 4 or 5 months ago. My son learned how to ride a bicycle without helping wheels. So he used to go down every day, have a big space, and he used to cycle and fall down. And I used to tell him, do this, do that, do that. And I realized that I'm talking too much. Then what I did, I took a step back. I realized that he, with himself, he has the motivation to learn. He doesn't need me. And then I let him do. After two, and he fall down, he did, step down, he did, step down, got a bit bored, went to play to the playground, came back. So I did nothing. After 5 days, he learned how to ride the bicycle.
I've had a similar experience with the pool where sometimes, I mean, you could probably already tell, I talk a lot. And some of my swim lessons have said I talk like a stock reel of information. So I realized I need to slow down, quiet at times. And what I really realized is that at some points, I try to overteach so they don't swallow water because that makes them panic. If you swallow water, you're going to get upset and be like, oh, that was scary, especially if you're fearful of the water. But I realized, especially with on average, but even some of the more like adult swim lessons, sometimes I have to just let them do that to learn why, like, here's why we kick this certain way. So you don't sink down and swallow water. And me telling them, sure, it'll go in, but it might go out the other side. Sometimes I just have to let them do the wrong kind of kick and learn for themselves, like, okay, if I do this, then I'm going to swallow water and it's going to lead to this bad outcome.
Yeah. I
Similar
think
to
sometimes,
falling down.
I think so. I think sometimes what some people need at work as well, they just need to try their own way. Okay, you give them the basics, you make sure they are safe, for example, like he was wearing a helmet. But sometimes you just need to be there at the background to make sure they feel safe and then let them do it. And sooner or later, they will learn by themselves.
And you, talking as a teacher, but as a coach too, you wrote a book, and I feel like that's all the same topics that you're teaching with that. So I'm very curious, kind of switching gears here. What led you to writing your book?
Yeah, Leading in VUCA Times. I have it here. And there you go.
I have to link a description too for people.
Send me your address. I'll send you an author's copy.
Okay, sounds good to me.
Yeah, no worries. I can do that. So it was driven. I wrote it in 2020. I published it in 2022. I wrote it in the middle of the pandemic. That was the good part of it because you spend more hours at home, right? So you have more time to do the things that you couldn't do before. So it was driven by my desire to encapsulate the insights and experiences I had accumulated over years of working across different industries and cultures. And I saw a gap in the conversation around leadership, and more specifically, how leaders can thrive in the middle of uncertain and volatile environments. So the book, I suppose, is my way of contributing to this discourse, right? Offering practical strategies and reflections that could help leaders navigate the complexities of our modern world. And it was also a personal challenge, a way to synthesize my thoughts and share them on a larger platform. So it's 40 chapters, 40, my experiences, my failures, my successes, some practical tips, a couple of 2-3 chapters on how to do this, how to do that, like how to do a proper performance review and so on and so forth. So self-published author. I've had all these people telling me, companies, come, I will help you publish your book, help you publish it. But actually nowadays, that's the good part of the technology. You spend a couple of days reading and watching a few videos, and you can actually publish the book by yourself.
Right. I'm actually very curious too, for my own personal sake. How did you finish writing it? Because I've been trying to write a book for a long time, and I have not gotten a chance to finish it.
Yeah, you know what works for me? I'll tell you what works for me. Might not work for everybody. I like to set times at the beginning of the day that I will do things. So let's say between 3 and 4, I'm going to read. Between 11 at night and 11:30, I'm going to write the book. So that works for me. There are other people that they take it as it comes. It doesn't work for me. So I like to schedule blocks of times to do specific things that I want to do. I'm not perfect. I'm not saying I do it all the time, but I think I do it most of the times. Like today, I said that after lunch, around 3, we had late lunch between 3 and 4. I will go to the gym, and I did it.
Mm-hmm.
Then I knew when I come back from the gym, it's going to be around 5:30, 6 o'clock local time. I had my call with you, the podcast. So after this, I'm going to have some dinner, and then, But it works for me to block times to do specific. I create my own, I create my own schedule.
Yeah, I definitely think that time blocking is one of the crucial ways for a lot of people to organize their time. I'm looking at my calendar now, and I've been a little bit bad about following some of the okay, I have this block, I should do this thing. But I agree with you. That's kind of that's how I've been successful in the past, is by just following the calendar. Kind of going off of that a little bit, how you manage your multidisciplinary life. You do all these different things. You just mentioned how you do these blocks on the calendar, but is there anything else you do to manage your time?
Yeah, time management is quite important, huh? It's actually one of my most popular coaching themes, time management. It requires intentional planning and a clear sense of priorities. I'm very practical. I take an A4 piece of paper, 4 quadrants with a pen, right? A cross in the middle. Top left, I write all the things I have to do. And then the quadrant to the right is, okay, so do is decide, do, delegate, delete. So I decide what I need to do, and then with arrows, I move them. So I have this, and things to do today. So which of the things I will do, I move them to the next box. Which of the things I will delegate, I move them to the relevant box. Which of the things I will delete, I move them to the relevant box. So again, it requires self-discipline, and time management is crucial. Setting boundaries and creating routines. For me, I like to create routines, even if the word sounds boring, but it helps me stay on track, Dustin. It's I don't really like it to wake up in the morning. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's interesting how you incorporate the Eisenhower matrix.
Yeah, you know it. There you go. It's the Eisenhower matrix, So, yeah, I like to keep things simple when we talk, right? Not to confuse, but there you go. Yeah, so I like to create routines. So, for example, my experience running, my own business, and my coaching is also sometimes, it's the insights I also gain from working with students and managers. It's interesting that sometimes if you want to learn something, you teach it. Because if you need to teach something, you need to research it, you need to study it, and then you deliver it, and then you get feedback and exchange opinions with others. So what's the benefit of this for the teacher, for the professor, is you actually learn the subject really deep. So I learn a lot also from my students, from my clients, from the C-suites I work with. And I think at the end of the day, it's about finding balance and making sure that each part of your professional life feeds into the others, right?
Yeah. I think that question leads quite into this next one pretty well, about being multidisciplinary, time management, doing many different things. So something I ask all my guests is, what is a polymath to you?
By the way, polymath is a Greek word, right?
Mm-hmm.
Poly means a lot. Matheno means learning. It's a state of mind. I suppose it's a state of mind. It's a state of mind. And the minute you say, I know it all, the minute as a manager you say, this is how we've always done it, I think you're not relevant anymore. So I think a polymath to me is somebody who possesses curiosity and practical expertise across multiple fields.
Practical part's really important.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, theory is good, but, when I teach, again, students or I coach, the ability to share real life stories from the real world, really, I think it's a valuable input. So, yeah, it's a state of mind. It's a really state of mind. And I think polymaths are connectors. Yeah. They see maybe, what I mean by connector, maybe they see relationships between seemingly unrelated disciplines and use that perspective to solve problems, right?
It's one of the reasons why I like this show, because being able to talk to people like you, and through the conversation, we generate synergies and find new connections. And I think you're one of the first guests, maybe someone else did, but I don't know for sure, that kind of brought up the etymology of it, the polis and poli of the Greek words for meaning much or many, and then the mathematics, not mathematics, but mathemania, I think is what is the math part.
That's right.
Disciplines,
Learning.
domains. Yeah, learning.
Yes.
And I think that's really interesting.
Yes.
And again, curiosity kind of forefront, but also the practicality aspect I want to drive home too, where it's like, if you don't use your knowledge for something, then there's no point, so to speak, in learning it.
I wish I was a polyglot as well. One of the things I wish
same.
I was, I wish, I see these guys on YouTube sometimes and they speak like 29 languages.
Yeah. I could say hi in like 20 languages, but that's about it.
It's fantastic, yeah. And it's not easy to learn. Again, it requires discipline. It requires, because it's not just learning the words, it's learning the culture, understanding the culture and the emotions when you speak the words. Saying a sentence is correct, but saying it with the right emotion is the challenging part.
And I think that learning accents is kind of important too. I know that some people might see it as mimicking or making fun of, but I think by learning accents, you get to understand the culture a little bit better, and you actually pay more attention to learn it too. And it allows you to communicate in a better way. Because if you say, Spanish words in an American accent, you're going to sound a little bit off. But I grew up in a Mexican culture, and so I was able to learn Spanish in a more Mexican accent. And it's just fascinating to think about that too. I actually got in trouble at one point because I was talking to someone who was German, and his accent was pretty pronounced. And for some reason, I just naturally picked it up. And he got a little bit mad at me, thinking I was mimicking him or mocking him. I was like, no. I just kind of pick it up naturally when I'm talking to somebody. But it was just interesting to think about. Yeah. The mirror neurons at the time too.
Yeah, you do.
I agree though. Being a polyglot would be really fascinating. Do you ever use like Duolingo or other language learning apps?
No, not really, to be honest. Like my son, interesting, huh? And I think you need to be agile. Agility in your mind, I think, is important. Like you see, our son, so talk about boy, he's 6 years old and he speaks 4 languages fluent. He speaks Chinese, Mandarin fluent. He speaks Greek fluent. He speaks English fluent and German.
It's crazy.
He just learned it. He just learned it, just from being a baby. At home, mother tongue is Greek, English, and Chinese, Mandarin. And at school now, in the culture, he's learning German. So
I've been trying to learn Mandarin recently on Duolingo in particular, because I feel like that's one of the languages I'd really want to know over the course of my life. A lot of Latin languages are pretty easy for me to pick up, but there's other ones, even like any kind of Slavic one's kind of hard. But
what's the best way to learn a language, right?
Immersion.
Find a partner from that language, right?
That's true. That's true. I guess that's why you know Mandarin well, huh?
I don't know, but yeah, my wife, our mother is from, she's Malaysian Chinese. But I'm also trying to learn. It's a phonetic language. It's not easy. Like Vietnamese. Vietnamese is quite interesting as well, but it's very phonetic. Like if you mispronounce a word or a letter or you put up or down, it can have a totally different meaning.
Yeah. I definitely heard of examples like that in Chinese too, where like you could be saying a curse word if you don't say it right.
You're right. So yeah.
We were talking about Singapore before this, and I think it's fascinating how Singlish came to be, because English is the main language there, but it's more mixture of Hindi and Malay and Mandarin. And it's just like, I think it's fascinating how the melting pot of cultures. Same with the US too.
Singapore and Malaysia. Yes. I mean, Singapore and Malaysia is they are multicultural, right? So they have Malay, they have Chinese, they have Indian, they have English. So yeah.
I think a real turning point when you're learning a language too is when you start thinking in that language and you don't have to translate in your head. So I remember at one point someone would be speaking to me in Spanish and I would translate it into English in my head to like understand what they're saying. But now there's certain points. I mean, I still not speaking it super fluently naturally. I can, but it takes a little bit of effort still. But a lot of the time when they speak to me in certain words, my brain will just hear that word and know what it means without having to translate it into English. And I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, you see, I don't know if have you ever been to the Philippines?
I have not, but I would like to.
Yeah, it's a lovely country, very polite people, and they used to be under Japanese occupation, but for 400 years under Spanish occupancy, right? Under Spain. Even now, some of the biggest families in the Philippines are Spanish descendants. But you see the difference, even though they are in APAC, the cultural difference they have. They sit down and drink coffee for hours. A lot of their words in Tagalog, they have Spanish, like Pero and different Spanish. The accent, the whole thing, it's a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of Filipino. Because of that, they have been colonized by the Spanish for 400 years. And you see the difference in culture, in lifestyle, in the things they like to do, They like to gather and eat big families all together and with wine and paella and all that.
I keep seeing these TikToks that are really funny. It's a Filipino or Filipina with a Latin person, like a Latino person. And so you have like the Filipina like teaching the baby, like, here, you want that nice delicious treat called puto. And the kid will be learning like, oh, puto, like that tastes good. I like puto. And then like in Spanish, that means the B word. And it's just funny to think about like how something so innocent in one language could be something different in someone else.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of going down to some final questions here, because I don't want to keep you too long. In your opinion, how does someone stay true to their virtues? It's kind of a loaded question, but I was curious what you thought.
By knowing your values,
Values.
Yes, by knowing your values. I think it requires also self-awareness and a commitment to reflection, if you know what I mean. It's easy to be carried away by external pressures, maybe, or the allure of short-term gains sometimes, right? But true integrity, I believe that true integrity comes from knowing what you stand for, therefore making decisions which are aligned with those values, even when it's difficult. And also, it's important, I think, to surround yourself with people who share similar values, and that's where sometimes coaching comes in, some people who will hold you accountable for it, And ultimately, it's about being honest with yourself and having the courage to stand by your principles. That's what I believe.
think the courage aspect, that's why I asked the question, because I had a feeling you would answer it in an interesting way. So I appreciate that. And so I guess the next question here is, what do you have coming down the line that you are looking forward to?
Yes. One of them is the expansion of my coaching practice, okay? Particularly in helping leaders navigate the complexities of digital transformation, because, since COVID, a lot of companies are using digital tools to do different things. How do you manage effectively hybrid teams or remote teams? So a lot of work on that aspect, digital transformation in leadership and in management. That's one thing. Another thing, on the academic side, I'm working on a new course. I think it's going to be ready by January, that integrates leadership with emotional intelligence, okay? Which is something I believe is important for the future of work. And it's also the possibility of another book. And the idea of the book, I have it in mind. I haven't done a first step, is towards millennial management. How do you manage, engage, and lead the younger generation? What do they need? Why do they need like this? How can you make sure you can effectively manage them, you can retain them, you can attract them, you can increase productivity without driving them crazy? Yeah, you see the approach of the approach of management and leadership is changing a lot. When I was a manager, I started, before we wrap up my managerial career, my first managerial role was when I was 25. And at that time, it was a very different approach. My management approach was very autocratic. It was like, I speak, you listen, you do, you don't need to think, you don't need to ask. And that worked. Now, I'm sorry to say, but you will not go far as a manager with this kind of approach. So you need a more inclusive leadership.
When I was a supervisor for the recreation center I worked at, which is where I started doing swimming, I had to manage multiple departments, from the pool, the gym, the basketball court, the front end area. And there was a lot of Gen Z people who worked there too. And I noticed there's a big difference in generation, because I know that each generation has its own generalizations, and you can't generalize a certain group of people by that. But there is this kind of like mindset in the Gen Z world where they would rather quit than have to face a really big challenge sometimes. And so I knew that if I were to be too autocratic and be like, hey, I told you you have to do this, then they're going to kind of turn off and ignore. So I tried to be using, like you said, emotional intelligence, understanding what their motivations might be and trying to use those to encourage them to do the things that I'm trying to get them to do, like, do their job. But in this case, yeah, it was just one of those things where it worked a lot of the time too. There were some people who just didn't want to be there, and you can't really change that. But for the ones that were open to working, you could motivate them to do more and encourage them to improve.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find a comment which I made yesterday on LinkedIn on a Harvard Business Review post about management, the best way to manage, the best way to approach, and all that. And for me, the best way to manage is to lead by example, show up, roll up your sleeves, show them how it's done, lead by example, and model the behavior you want to see. And it's an old school approach maybe to lead, but it's not an old school approach, but it's back to basics maybe. Roll up your sleeves, show them how it's done, lead by example, therefore model the behavior you want to see, set the standards.
Leading by example. Well, if anyone's interested in learning more from you, looking at your book, your YouTube, or whatever, mind you, where can people find you online?
LinkedIn is my preferred social media platform, LinkedIn.
Yeah.
If you type my name, Evantzi, and you pronounce my name really well, first of all, I'd say we didn't practice, right? The T is silent, Tzivanakis, you did very well. So if you type my name on LinkedIn, Evan Tzivanakis, EVAN space TZI, I will come up and drop me a request there. And I really like LinkedIn. We can have a conversation there. And that's how we got connected, by the way. Huh?
Exactly.
From someone else.
I have LinkedIn as the first link down in the description for you, so no worries. What do you think could be a call to growth for the audience to do?
What do you mean? Sorry, say again?
So a good call to action is to connect with you on LinkedIn, or maybe go look at your YouTube or something like that, or look at the book. But a good call to growth is, so I like to ask my guests too, like, what do you think the audience could do to improve themselves?
Yeah, call to growth. Shall we take the approach from a management approach, or?
Sure. Whatever you think is most fitting, considering our conversation.
Yes.
And don't worry, I'll delete out any pause.
No, it's fine. It's communication. I think communication is the hallmark of an effective leader. And communication is exceptionally important, really important in life, at home, and at work. And it's something I had to work with, is to be a better listener, and communicate well. You see, we tend to reply because we want to show that we know the answer, or we have done this, or we have done that. But sometimes it's good to just listen, and ask the right questions and take a pause. And I really think communication is the hallmark of an effective leader. The ability to listen, the ability to let other people finish their sentence, basic things, the ability to ask good clarifying questions, to understand the subliminal message, to go to the root cause. And I think if we improve communication at home and at work, we will live better. It's not easy because we have a lot of challenges, timekeeping, we need to do this, we need to do that, we have multiple work to do. Sometimes we rush, and I realize sometimes we rush for no reason. Sometimes it's good to take a step back and observe and listen and take a few breaths, and the 5 second, 5 breaths, and then speak, or then decide what you're going to do. Sometimes, sleeping on a problem makes the problem easier.
I think Einstein said something like that as well at one point.
Did he?
One thing
Yeah,
I
probably.
find probably knowing him, it's interesting to think about too the active listening aspect, because as a host, that has been my number one issue. Where when I first started, I knew that since I like to talk, I needed to learn to shut up and listen. Even during this call, I got excited from what you were talking about, and my brain was like, "Oh, I want to respond," but I had to stop myself and bring myself back and take a deep breath and make sure my mind was open to make sure I hear what you say and I can respond afterwards in a more effective way.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good skill to have. And one thing I can share before we wrap up is just the fact that, like, hey, like you said, take a deep breath. And I think meditation is a big help for that, because when you meditate, all these mind ideas come to you and you have to let it go. Same thing happens when you're active listening too. You have to let those ideas go and focus on what's at hand.
I've never tried meditation. Have you tried it?
Yeah. Let me turn off my
Yeah.
sound here. I have tried meditation. It's not my greatest skill. It's something I still have to work on, but it is one of those things where it's a lot more practical than people realize. And I see it as working out the brain rather than just being some kind of spiritual practice, which it is, but it's both.
Yeah. I like to talk as well. I mean, having like to talk is not bad, because we are, if you don't like to talk, you cannot do a podcast. Like, you know.
Well, we're both
It's,
coaches and teachers. Like, it makes it's in our blood.
Yes. Or you can be a lawyer, you can be a politician, or you can be a public speaker. But it's the ability sometimes, as you say, to shut up and let people, listening well.
Well, once again, this is Dustin and Evan on the Polymath Polycast. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure. It was a fantastic conversation. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it a lot.
I did too.